Hey, BJ Thomas here, Sword Select athlete for 2018 and proud of it. Well, during the recent Land Between the Lakes 60K, this big old body took a beating on the outside, but on the inside, it was sword all day long. And Mr. Forward Motion and his sword did it again. Sword, a 20% discount. Just use that code. Heartland Runner.
Welcome to the Heartland Running Podcast. Join Crystal, Andy, and Chandler as they explore all things running related in the Heartland and beyond.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Heartland Running Podcast. I'm Crystal.
I'm Andy.
And Chandler is off tonight. He had to step out last moment, but he'll be back. I think he's stopping by. We're recording one tomorrow, and I think he's popping by for that one. So we hope he's enjoying whatever he's doing. And I'll tell you, for tonight's episode, they say if you ask, you shall receive. And I feel like our guest tonight was a gift to me. And so after a couple races recently, we've been kind of sitting around talking about wanting to do an episode on crewing and pacing. And we were kind of talking about it'd be nice to have kind of a resource, because a lot of times we rope in our friends, our families, to come and do this. And there's not always a great resource to do it. And there's a lot that goes into it. So I was sitting back just the other day and I'm thinking, who can we bring on, and who would be a fun guest to talk about that? And as I was thinking about that, my message popped into my inbox, and it was just a weekly email from Ultra Running magazine. And sure enough, the first article in all the links of articles happened to be The Goal of Pacing and Crewing by Amy Clark. So the first thing I did was reach out and go, hey, Amy, how would you like to come on? Because I think this was a sign that it was meant to be. And so Amy was gracious enough to say yes. So we have Amy Clark with us tonight. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you for having me.
So quickly about Amy, because she has a pretty cool bio. Amy Clark is a freelance writer and runner living in Bend, Oregon. And in addition to running marathons and ultras, she has parasailed in Baja, snowboarded in Big Sky. And this one is so super cool. And I cannot say we've had another guest with this. She has also fought wildfires for the U.S. Forest Service. So that's super cool. She's a native of Oregon, and she is working on her first extreme adventure novel. Welcome again, Amy. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. That's a long bio.
Yeah, but it's so cool.
Oh, thanks.
I absolutely love the forest, fighting the forest fires. I think that's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, so tell us.
All pre-kids, right?
Isn't it funny how we were so much cooler before kids?
Right.
And organized. So tell me, seriously though, quickly, tell us a little bit about the fighting the wildfires.
Fighting wildfires. So back in college, when I was, I guess, a freshman or sophomore, I got a job working with the Detroit Ranger District here in Oregon, which is kind of central, I guess, and started on trail crew. So I got to hike a lot of trails, which, led into eventually running, but got to hike a lot of trails. And on the side, we would do forest firefighting. I guess we would do a little bit of firefighting. And we had to go to fire camp. And then I eventually moved to Bozeman I transferred colleges and was on the fire crew there. So I was firefighting in Bozeman, Montana, and all around. We went up to Canada and fought some fires in Canada as well. But it was a little hurry up and wait. That's kind of the they say. So you hurry up and you wait for the fires, and then it's like, oh, wait around, and then okay, go fight them, and then you're up for 24 hours, and it can be exciting at times, but it's a lot of waiting. So
it sounds a lot like crewing. I have a feeling this may be a theme for tonight.
Exactly.
So you kind of mentioned a little bit in there about, sounds like that's how you got started, maybe some of the trail running and stuff. Did you start off on roads? What was your path into running?
So my history with running, my dad was a runner. He ran the Boston Marathon back in 1988.
Close.
And I kind of just glommed onto that and wanted to do the same thing. So I ended up running marathons starting in 2002. Ran Boston in 2008, so 20 years after my dad did it. And then after that I was kind of lost. I was like, I accomplished my goal. Like, I don't know what I want to do next. Should I go run Boston again? I don't know. And then this just magical kind of thing came up, and I have this friend who wanted to run ultras as well. And I just got into it. I mean, I honestly don't know how it happened, but it was the perfect timing because I needed a goal and I took off and just was like, I want to do it all.
Oh, that's so cool.
So I started running ultras back in 2014.
So what was that first ultra distance that you did?
I did a 50K.
Did a 50K? Yeah.
One here in Oregon. Yeah. I have my sights set on 100, but it's a slow process when you're running ultras.
Oh, yeah.
For me anyway, I don't want to jump into it too quickly. So
I'm still working my way towards that. I have 2 attempts now, and number 3 is going to be the charm. So
for a 50K?
No, for the 100.
For the 100. Okay.
Yeah. It's been tough. I've got as close to mile 76.
Awesome.
So we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. No, that's awesome.
So what are some of your goals for this year?
So for this year, I have a 100K planned in May, the Miwok 100K in California. And I actually tried 100K last year up at the Gorge Waterfalls 100K up in Oregon, up in by Portland. And the course was so destroyed from the winter that we had that it was tough. So I made it to mile 50. So
yeah.
Hoping for a finish this year and for a Western States qualifier at Miwok.
That's awesome. So speaking of Western States, you kind of have a pretty cool crewing gig yourself this year.
Yeah. So my first crewing gig was 2 years ago at Western States, and I got pretty lucky with that one because I haven't. The closest thing to crewing I had before that was probably I would say a relay. I was thinking about it, and relay. If you've ever done a relay, it's a similar thing because you start and you're just on for however long the relay is. If it's 200 miles, if it's 150 miles, you're in a van with a bunch of people and you're kind of helping each other out and cheering each other on. So that was kind of the closest thing I'd had prior to Western States. So I was lucky enough to go down. 2 years ago, and for the first time, crew Carl Hoagland, who's the editor for Ultra Running Magazine.
Very cool.
And his wife, Erica. So I crewed for both, and I paced for Carl towards the very end of the race for about 16 miles. That was quite a fun experience. And it's amazing. Crewing and pacing and being a part of everything and getting that runner to the finish line, it's the best. So
that's awesome. So is that who you're crewing for again this year?
Yeah. So Carl, this will be his 10th Western States.
Wow.
And he's always got that silver buckle. So he's been under 24 hours. To get the silver buckle, you have to finish in under 24 hours. And he's done it every time. So 9 sub 24-hour finishes. So he's done really well.
That is incredible. Yeah. That's so cool.
It sounds a lot to me like, Western States is that iconic ultra marathon that everyone, wants to either be a part of or do. And something that's very difficult to get into. It sounds like, if you crew and pace, that's almost like an opportunity for someone to kind of get their foot in the door and get an opportunity to have some sort of experience with some of these races that are iconic like that.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt after I did my first kind of gig as a crew and pacer. I had watched the race online probably for the couple years prior to that, and I was so excited about it. I wanted to be a part of it, and I didn't understand anything about crewing or pacing at the time. And when the opportunity came up to go down there, I had no idea what to expect, but being just immersed in that whole race, there's so much passion, there's so much love for everybody that's in it, there's so much support. It's being able to be a part of that race is almost better than running it. I'm not going to say that because I do want to run it, but being and watching it from the perspective of a crew or pacer, or even at the aid station, it's just so much because you get to be a part of it in your own way.
Yeah.
Well, that makes for a great transition into kind of what the topic of our discussion is going to be is, just the basics of crewing and, what's the difference between, someone's crewing, someone's pacing. Why do you think someone should make the decision to actually crew for someone? And, and the difference between runners and non-runners, whenever they crew, let's just kind of hit the basics,
Sure.
Crewing 101.
Sure. So helpful to have a crew when, I didn't realize this until I ran my first 100K, but when you are out there by yourself running for miles and there's nobody out there and you've hit mile 50 or even prior to that, mile 40, having a crew, people around you who are there waiting for you to help you, take care of you. I think that the basics are you need someone that's going to look at you and say, what's wrong? What do you need? What can I get you? Because you're going to be so tired and so exhausted that your brain just kind of, it gets very hazy at that point, I think, in a race. So having a crew with, your essential fuels, extra goos, whatever it may be, medical supplies, because gosh, I haven't had to deal with blisters or anything like that in a race yet. But having that, just those faces, those familiar faces, I think is the most important thing. Seeing that on the trail, it probably better than anything.
It is. It's such a great feeling. I know from my last race, well, not from my last one, but from last year when I was at Tunnel Hill. And, my family was actually at one of the aid stations where I didn't expect that they were going to be there. And it was one of those moments where I was just having a low, and just to see their faces, I'm like, I didn't care about anything else, but it is that pick me up of having somebody there that's familiar. It's such a spark and brings you back real quick.
Yeah, for sure. I've been in, it's one of those things in the back of your mind. You're always like, okay, who would be my crew? Because my family, they're not going to want to travel and stay up for 30 hours or whatever it may be to support me. And I'm like, well, I've got these really great running friends. And so you kind of have to pick and choose who's going to stay up all night and wait for you to come through each aid station. I mean, I think that's a huge thing to consider when you're looking for a crew. And as a crew person, you have to consider, I'm going to be waiting around a lot, probably not going to get a lot of sleep. I know I don't think I got any sleep the last few years when I was in Western States for, 30 hours. So it's something to consider. Yeah.
And I think that's another point that you made too, is when you pick somebody, sometimes it's hard to pick someone who's a close family member who doesn't understand running. Because I know sometimes when people have their parents or other people come out, they're horrified to see the amount of pain and suffering. And so you need somebody who's not going to tell you to quit. Like, are you sure you want to keep doing this? And so I think that's something else that they need to be prepared for too, is that, it hits a certain point. It's not pretty. I mean, as my husband said one time, you're going to see things you can't unsee.
Exactly. We had Carl, the year before I paced him, I guess he was having a really rough patch at about mile 40. And Corey, who is the director of operations for Ultra Running Magazine, said that Carl ran into mile 48 station and basically was ready to quit. And Corey just took the bag and started to walk away. No, you're not getting a ride from me. And fortunately, Carl pushed through and finished. But it's those rough patches where you have to say, you're going to move forward. Nothing's wrong with you. Just keep going. And that's what you need a crew to do.
And then so before we kind of jump too much into the crew, because this is for basics for people who don't know, let's first talk about what the difference between a crew is and what a pacer is. Because sometimes they're the same, but sometimes they're very different.
Right. Well, two different jobs, but my personal experience is performing both at the same event. So the crew is multiple people who are there to support a runner, usually longer races such as a 100-miler. They'll allow crew at certain points during the race, and that depends all on the race course. So if it's a loop, you're probably going to see them at the same point. If it's a point-to-point, you're going to see them at different aid stations along the way in the latter miles of the race. And they're going to be able to have access to you to help you at each point. So usually that's an aid station, and bring supplies to help you out, water bottles, shoes, whatever you need. Drop bags kind of perform that function prior to the point where a crew can reach you. So a drop bag is something that you can just have access to at each aid station early on, something that you put together and take to a race and say, here's, I don't know how many bags, usually 2 or 3 bags that you want to put an extra pair of shoes in or some socks in. So essentially those are what you'll get access to prior to the longer miles where your crew can reach you.
And then, so pacer, describe the job of a pacer.
So pacers. So when roadrunners think of pacers, they think of like a pacing group. I realized that when I was talking to somebody, marathons have pacing groups, but a pacer is actually somebody who you can choose to run with you the last quarter of a 100-miler or 100K, that will essentially be your buddy and keep pushing you through the last 25, 40 miles, whatever it may be. And sometimes you can have more than one. So there's an opportunity to run with multiple people to get you to the finish line.
So it sounds like whenever you're trying to pick someone who's going to pace for you, you probably need to have a lot of trust in that person, or maybe experience with running with them, so that way they can understand you and know what your needs are, and not try to make you do something that's not out of the norm for you, or just someone who you can just be comfortable with. Right, preferably. That would be the case, but it's not always the case. I actually did not know Carl before I ran with him. Mm-hmm. I got to meet him and stuff before we ran together, but I had no idea what I was in for. And I knew that he was a fast runner, but at mile 80, I think was when we met up. Everybody slows down at mile 80. So I was able to kind of keep up with him. There was a few things actually that I had been told prior to running with him. And one was, Carl likes to talk about ways you can die on the trail. Sure enough, when we were running on the Western States course, we passed a bench that was a memorial bench for a woman who had been attacked by a cougar about 20 years prior. So he pointed that out, and I was like, okay, well, that checks that off the list. But I think I pointed out in my article that Western States has a pacer request page because people can pick up pacers, and it's just nice to have somebody to run with. And I think people it's an opportunity for people to, if they're willing, to get to know somebody new, run with a stranger, especially in a race that they're both familiar with, or both excited to run on the course. And so it doesn't have to be somebody that you necessarily know, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, one of the things, too, that you pointed out is I don't think you should be afraid to be a pacer, because sometimes people are afraid because, like you said, like Carl's a fast guy. So, for a lot of people, that would be really intimidating. But again, keeping in mind that by the time you're hitting mile 80 in a race, or by the point, somebody's picking up a pacer, there's a lot of walking, and it's a lot slower than what you would, imagine it would be.
Right. Yep. It's those last miles, and there's definitely, it's a slower pace. We, Western States course, we hiked a lot of uphill on that last section. And so, your runner's going to be tired no matter what they put themselves through, unless you're pacing an elite, which sometimes elites will outrun their pacer. They'll drop them. So it can happen. So that's rare.
Well, and then you get to say you ran for that person for at least that amount of time, right? And then sometimes, what if somebody's kind of pacing for the first time? What are maybe some of the race rules kind of that some pacers should be aware of?
Good question.
And I know this varies kind of by race.
Right. By race, it varies, but I was not allowed to carry anything for the racer. And I think that was the one rule that I was kind of hyper aware of, was that I wasn't allowed to carry any supplies for my runner.
Yeah, I think a lot of times that's one of the big ones. And sometimes people don't realize that, but you can't, I guess they call it muling for the runner. So you can help them be aware of a lot of stuff. You can, get them to eat, get them to drink, but you can't carry a lot of stuff for them. Now, there are some exceptions, like I think Leadville, you're allowed to do that. So I think it's one of those things that even going in and pacing, make sure that you understand what you can and cannot do.
Right. It's every race is different. And so the rules are always going to be unique to the race, depending on the course and whatnot.
And then so as a runner, when you're dealing with a pacer, what kind of advice would you have for a runner who's kind of having to go with a pacer for the first time? So for example, I've run races with friends and we've stuck together, but I've never actually used a pacer. And I think that maybe some of the things that are holding me back. So I think maybe in my next 100 attempt, I would like to have a pacer there. What kind of advice would you have for a runner?
I think it's best for every runner who's about to embark on 100 miles and has a crew and a pacer or multiple pacers is to meet with them prior to the race and say, here's what I'm going to be doing. Here's what I want you to do. Just fill them in as to how they want you to react to certain situations. Because if you come in at mile, 80 and you're hurting and you're like, I'm having a hard time, and just tell them, walk behind me. Just keep talking to me. Just keep me moving forward. I mean, I think that's the best advice I can give to a runner who is ready to use a pacer and is like, I'm just going to go out and run with somebody. But you can't just do that. You have to talk to them prior to the race and be like, okay, here's the situation. This is what you might see me at mile 80, and you might see me and I'm dead, and just keep me moving forward. So I think it's good to have a crew meeting or a pacer meeting prior to the race.
Just have some clear expectations prior to going into the race.
Right.
One thing that would concern me, I've never used a pacer myself, but having a clear cut, because, I won't be, I imagine that I would not be thinking clearly. I would, be having difficulty making decisions for myself. At what point would I allow a pacer to say, maybe you need to quit, maybe you're done for the day? I know that's pretty open-ended, but
I've heard a couple stories, but most of the stories, that end in, you should have quit. But most of the things that I hear are, you're going to regret it if you quit.
Yeah.
So I can't, beyond broken bones, and even then, I can't see anybody saying, okay, this is the point I should quit. Because I think most runners want to get to the finish line, and it's for everybody involved. It's heartbreaking when you see somebody DNF, which is did not finish, and you don't want to see somebody do that, because the next day, the next hour, they're probably gonna, if they were just sore or tired or fatigued, there's no reason to quit. Beyond broken bones, I say, tell your pacer to keep pushing me.
keep them going.
Yeah. And I think that some of those conversations that you talked about, having it ahead of time of laying out a plan of, hey, when I get to this point, don't let me quit, or, setting out when it is okay to let me quit. Because, it is so individual for everyone. I know when I took my DNF at Tunnel Hill, it was at 76. And by that point, I had tendonitis in my leg really bad, and I could barely walk. And likely I wasn't going to make a cutoff if I had pushed through. But even with that, in the race directors, Steve Durbin, and I've heard other people say it, he said, you'll know by the time you get back to the car whether it was the right or wrong decision. Because if you regret it that fast, it was wrong. And it took me 6 weeks to get over that injury. And so if I would have pushed it another 25 miles, it would have taken a lot longer if I would have even been able to finish at that point. So yeah, I think that's one of the important things, that having a lot of conversations with your pacers, and some people like to have, do you want me to be in front? Do you want me to be behind? Those types of things of finding out what your runner's preferences are. Do you want me to be a hard ass on you? Or do you need, because some people need that, like, you're not going to quit and just, giving the tough love. Or some people, that's just going to make them crack and break down, and maybe they need a little bit of the, gentler approach.
Right. I was very, I wasn't sure how I was going to talk to Carl or how he was going to be out on the trail. And I was pretty quiet most of the time, just kind of sticking behind him and running. We didn't exchange a lot of words until the very end, when he was very grateful and for the work that I had helped him with. But I felt like my silence was kind of necessary. I didn't feel like I needed to say much. So, and that's different for everybody.
Yeah, that's another good one. Another good thing, I think, to establish ahead of time is when you get to the finish. What happens at the finish? Because some people want their pacers to finish with them, and some of them want them out of the way and finish alone. And so I think that's another thing, to set up that expectation ahead of time. Yeah, I didn't know, actually. And when we got to the track at Auburn, it was Carl wanted everybody with him. Aww. And I wait. No, this is your moment. I don't want to run. But that's what he wanted. And so he was very inclusive of everybody that helped him out, which was really cool. So that is really cool. Before we go back to crewing, do you have any other suggestions on pacing or any other thoughts?
After pacing, I really felt like my experience as a parent helped out on that, because thinking ahead, Carl actually wasn't taking in sugar and was having a really hard time getting food in. And so he had eaten some soup at like mile 85. And there was a point where he actually threw up, which was, I think, the first time he told me he had ever thrown up. And so I grabbed at the next aid station a bunch of non-sugary stuff. And so I kind of packed it away, knowing that he may need some fuel for the last 15 miles. And sure enough, he needed it. He was struggling. And so thinking ahead as a pacer as to what your runner might encounter, always be on your toes. Like, what do you think he's going to need? Because as a crew, you have that one opportunity. But as a pacer, you're always there with your runner, and you need to take care of them. So
that's a good point. And kind of to go with that too, something else had popped into my mind, that again, it's your job to take care of that runner. And so when you're going in, don't take a pacing job because you need to get a training run in, or you're needing to get miles or anything about that. You have to go in and know this is not about you in any way, shape, or form. So you're going in with what that runner needs.
Exactly.
Okay, so crewing. So we've talked about pacing. So let's talk a little bit about crewing, and then what's that like? That could be more of your family members, or more of maybe some non-runners that are just there to kind of meet you at aid stations and have things ready for you. So what is that job like?
I think we talked about the whole hurry up and wait.
Yeah, because what does crew stand for?
I can't remember.
Crabby runner, endless waiting.
That's right. Forget about that. Yes, it's different for every race, I think. I haven't done crewing at any other race besides Western States, and Western States is point to point. So the travel, I think, especially being trail running, you're not on roads, you're on trails, so you have to access those trails, and getting to those aid stations can be, depending on the race, can be difficult. So a lot of driving. There's no cell service, so you're driving out in the middle of nowhere for miles and miles and miles to get access to these aid stations. So there's that aspect of it.
I'm curious on the logistics of that. So you don't have a cell signal or anything like that. How are you locating where you need to go? And how stressful is that?
It's stressful. Yeah. Some people say it's more stressful than running it. Fortunately, the race supplies you with all the maps and the directions. And you're following a lot of other people. So everybody's going kind of to the same place you are. So that's also a nice part of it, because you know where you're going based on the amount of people that are also driving there.
So hopefully the person in the lead knows where they're going.
Right. But yeah, there's no, you have a map and you just follow it as best you can out in the middle of nowhere. So all the aid stations of Western states happen to be kind of in the same area out in the middle of nowhere. So you're still, there's good signage.
Well, that's good. So are you hiking into a lot of the aid stations, or are they pretty accessible for what you're doing?
They're accessible, but due to the amount of people that go to these small areas, there's a lot of cars. And so the traffic is pretty, the cars are backed up usually. It's hard to find a parking space in the middle of nowhere on these forest roads. So you're walking for a ways.
Yeah. I know at, I just did Land Between the Lakes, and a friend of ours, Jeff, was there, and I have to say, he has an awesome crew. So his wife and his friend Mindy come out. His wife is a physical therapist and Mindy is a nurse. So I don't think you can get a much better crew than that. But it was interesting because they had to hike into a lot of the aid stations, and they made it to every single one. But what's interesting is they ended up walking over 7 miles that day, just going from aid station to aid station. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah. There's hiking into aid stations, and then there's also the aid stations where there's actually shuttles that bus you in to some of the aid stations in the Western states. And there's one in particular, the river crossing. There's a pretty major river crossing, mile 78, I think. And the bus that takes you down to this aid station it goes basically down this really, really steep hill and just goes switchbacks all the way down. And I'm glad it's in the dark that I'm doing this, because it's kind of scary. It's bumpy, and you're going down this really steep hill, but you just don't want to see outside. So, yeah.
So you think it's actually less scary than in the dark when you can't see? I guess you can't see, you're about to fly off the edge. Is that?
Exactly. That's the whole thing. Yeah. You just don't want to see. So some of the, you're not necessarily hiking, but it can be a little stressful.
Okay, so you're the crew, and you've got your vehicle that you're most likely going from station to station. What are you going to carry with you? What are the things that you're going to keep your runner going with?
So I am lucky enough to have a pack. Carl and his wife Erica packed what they thought they would need. So you've got shoes, you've got body glide, which is, some kind of skin lubricant, extra clothes, extra socks, fuel, and, that could mean gels or food. Carl packed sandwiches, and that was his thing. Erica didn't need nearly as much. She was purely goo and tailwind. But the big thing was ice, and that was something that everybody really needed on that course. And the ice bandanas, you stuff ice in the bandanas, and then they tie them around their necks or stuff it in their arm sleeves because the course is so hot. So it really, you've got the essentials that a runner might need, clothing-wise and fuel-wise. But then depending on the course, if it's too cold or if it's too hot, you're going to need the extra, whatever it may be, the ice or I guess extra clothes. So rain gear, whatever might be necessary.
And then what are you carrying, though, to take care of yourself? Because it seems like that would be an important part of crewing as well, that, you're up for 30 hours, you're doing all this other stuff, and you're making sure everybody else is looked after. Again, I think this is kind of that parent part coming in, that, you got to make sure you're looking after yourself as well.
True. I kept that in mind, and I ate as much as I needed to, had a few extra pieces of clothing, but you got to take care of yourself. You got to hydrate. You got to eat. That's just as important as keeping your runner going, because you need to be alert and you need to be fed. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to take care of them. So it's a parent thing. Yeah.
See, I think parents make good crew.
Right.
So what are some of the things leading up to the race too. So we're kind of jumping in during the race, but what are some of the things as a crew member that you're going to plan or work on maybe before the race even starts?
So like I mentioned earlier with the pacing, we usually have a crew meeting prior to the race, like about 12 hours before it starts or less. And I think that's essential because it's kind of getting everybody's heads together and brings up questions you might not think about. You kind of get a sense for your runner and the course and cover things that may not have been covered prior to getting to the race start. So it's a good time to kind of just rehash everything before the race.
So for a runner who maybe hasn't used crew before, and maybe it's everybody's first time, like they have a brand new crew, it's runner's first time using crew, what are some of the things that they should be talking about?
Yeah, I think there's a good... there should be a good sense for how your runner is going to be later in the race, what they think they might need as opposed to what they actually need. Or it's funny because Carl and I hate to keep bringing that up, but he was so different. The first year I crewed him, he would come into an aid station and sit for like 5 minutes. And in the second year I crewed him, he would come into the aid station and leave within a minute. So I think that as long as a runner knows how they plan on strategizing for their own race, they can communicate that to you. I think that knowing your runner and knowing how to take care of them at those later stages is probably the key. There's so much information. There's so many different situations that could happen. Just be ready for anything. So,
And then normally attending the pre-race meeting is normally a good idea for crew as well, don't you think? I know sometimes just the runners go, but I always think it's a good idea so that everybody can kind of hear the same message so that if your runner misses something, there's, other ears there to hear it.
Right. I never did just because it was so crowded, but
yeah, I think it's harder at a Western States.
It's a good idea for people who haven't done it before. I think it's a great idea.
Great. And then so you're out at the aid stations. How do you coordinate how and like when you're going to meet your runners so that you know that you're not going to miss them?
There you go. That's a good one. Prior to the race, usually I get a good time estimate, and sometimes that happens. Sometimes they meet that time estimate. Sometimes they don't. So they'll set up different, like a range of time that they could be at the aid station. If I'm doing really great, I'll be there at this time. If I'm not, I'll be there closer to this time. Usually that works. It's just all up in the air.
So do you really just kind of go from one aid station to the next with little downtime in between? Like your downtime is pretty much at the next aid station?
Yeah. It's like, okay, they left the aid station. Now go to the next one and go. And then you wait. You just sit around you get to the next one. And you just wait. You start watching runners come through and it's like, oh man, are they coming? Maybe that's them. And it's just this anticipation the whole time. It's a lot of work.
It is.
But it's so much fun.
And then so kind of coming through to the end of a race, what's left to do as a crew member when they're finishing up?
Crewing kind of towards the end kind of subsides. They don't need a whole lot. Usually you just top off water bottles, and every time that I've crewed, it's been at night is when they finish or early morning. And so there's really not a lot that's needed, and it gets pretty easy at that point, but you still want to be there. It's like, oh, do you need your goo? It's like, nah, I'm just going to keep going. So it gets a lot less for the crew. I'd say more for the pacer at the end. So
more on them.
Yeah.
So now that you've been on the end of the crew, and I'll tell you, part of this conversation came out. We were at Land Between the Lakes, and at the end, a bunch of us were all having dinner together, and Tom was there, and Tom's a friend of ours, Corey, who will actually be out at Western States. He got in this year, and he's his crew chief. And so he stood up and gave this wonderful toast about all the runners, and then turned about how it should all be about the crew and how thankful we should be for them, and how ungrateful we are, and how hard they work, and it should all be about them. And so it was kind of funny and lighthearted. But I mean, just as describing this, it's a lot of work to crew, and runners get cranky and all that. So kind of what advice can you give to runners on how to treat their crew members? So before the race, during the race, after the race, kind of give some advice to the runners. Tell us to smarten up.
I am a beer or two. No, I honestly, it's so funny because all the times I've crewed, I've been given thanks and gratitude. Nobody's ever been cranky. And I personally feel so lucky to have that experience getting them to the finish line that I really don't need anything. Now, I can't say that if I had a cranky runner and they were like, I'd be a little like, hey, come on now. It took 30, a whole day out of my life and lack of sleep and to get you to the finish line. But, it's, as a runner, I'm so grateful for anyone who comes out and helps me, that I try to be as vocal as possible with my gratitude. And because I don't expect anything as a runner. I'm like, that's okay. Don't worry about it. But it's so nice to have those people there and to make sure you give them thanks and, pay for a meal or take them out to dinner. It's just show them you're thankful.
Yeah, because I think that's a pretty big deal that, to have someone go through all of that work and effort to get a runner across the finish line, and then, they don't get the glory, they don't get, that satisfaction of finishing that race, other than just, they were part of that experience with you. And so I think, that is a tremendous amount of gratitude that you really need to show to a crew, because, that's a great thing they do for you.
Yeah, and usually they're traveling to get down to the race. Often they are. So it's, they're taking a weekend just for you. So don't forget that.
Yeah, it's a bit. So our big heartfelt thank you to all of the crew members and pacers out there. We, couldn't do it without you. So Tom, we appreciate you. We'll have to make Tom listen to this. So crew members, we've talked about how hard it is. You're hurrying up and waiting. You have cranky runners. You're going to see and smell nasty things that you can't unsee. Why should somebody volunteer for this? What would make somebody want to do this?
I think that honestly, it's an experience that you're not going to get anywhere else. And it's amazing. It really is. It's something that you get to help somebody accomplish a goal. And, you can't say that very often. It's like you can accomplish your own goals, but to help somebody accomplish their goal in particular, and you're not even doing the running, you're just helping them out, supporting them. And it's such a great feeling to watch them cross that finish line. I can't replicate that anywhere. So that's my reason. And I think that it's probably a lot of other crew members' reasons too. So.
Yeah, I think even for people who don't run, it's so inspirational just to be out there and to see what these people are doing. And, we've talked about before the trail community, the ultra community. It's like one big family. And I don't think you can experience that anywhere else. And so to be part of something where you're not actually the runner or you're not the athlete, and to feel like you're part of something that's, so much bigger is I think a really cool feeling.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's pretty common when you see that person cross the finish line in their first 100-miler and just realize what they've done. And it's hard not to get caught up in that emotion.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Well, I'm looking forward to this summer. I guess by that point it'll be fall. I'll have my first pacing gig where I've actually volunteered to pace. Our friend of the show, Andrew, he's going for the Midwest Super Slam. And so most of the hundreds that he's doing this year, it conflicts with other stuff that I have going, but his final 100, I'll be there for, and I'll actually help pace that. So that'll be really cool.
Awesome.
That's pretty exciting. So what do you think, Andy? You gonna go crew and volunteer and pace some this summer?
I think that sounds like a lot of fun. I mean, we've got some opportunities here locally. We've got a 100-miler, and then there's a 200K. That's going to be just down the road from us. And so I don't know if anyone's going to be doing that I know. But there's definitely some opportunities there. So, yeah, I think so. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
You got to smile now, right?
I'll smile the whole time.
See, this is always my big thing while running. I'm like, I always smile. And Andy's like, I'm not smiling.
Yeah.
But
I
it's
always have this terrible pained look on my face.
But it's different when you're volunteering and helping out.
Yeah.
Awesome. So before we go, do you have any other big words of wisdom for us, Amy?
Oh, big words of wisdom.
No pressure.
If you have a pacer or if you pay somebody, try to pass it along to the next runner, because, it's nice to pay that back. And so I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another good reason right there to go out and pace and cruise is to have that opportunity to give back. So I think that's great. I think that's also something too, if you're injured as well, sometimes it's easy to want to just kind of withdraw and hide away from all of that. But I think that's an excellent opportunity to get out there to a race that maybe you were supposed to run and go out and volunteer and help and don't pace, but crew and contribute what you can. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Do you have anything else, Andy, before we go?
No, I think I'm good. I'll go ahead and take us out.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I'd like to make a shout out to the Ozark Mountain Daredevils that always let us use their music to take us into the show and out of the show. If you want some more information, you can visit us at www.heartlandrunning.com. We're going to have the show notes there and also some more information, links to some previous podcasts and lots of other fun stuff. Make sure you come and join us on our Facebook group. If you have something interesting that you want to say and want to be a part of the show, you can call our voicemail or you can text us at 1-513-486-4636. If we like what you have to say, we'll include you into the show. And make sure you tell a friend. And wherever you listen to this, if you go through iTunes or whatever podcatcher that you pick us up through, then leave a review. That helps people find the show and gives us an opportunity to reach some more ears. So anyway, that ends this show. Amy, thank you very much for coming on. We sure appreciate all of your knowledge and information on pacing and crewing.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And so, we'll go ahead and end this. And so I am Andy.
And I'm Crystal.
And we will see you next time.